I'm Emma Rodriguez, 32, and I'm the CEO of TechFlow Solutions, a company worth $2.8 billion that employs over 15,000 people worldwide. What my extended family doesn't know is that all 12 of my cousins work for me, and they have no idea who signs their paychecks. Last Thanksgiving, while sitting at my aunt's dining table, my cousins thought it was hilarious to mock my Tourette syndrome. They mimicked my tics, made cruel jokes, and turned my neurological condition into their entertainment. My cousin Jake even filmed it, posting it to his social media with laughing emojis. They called me Twitchy Emma and said I'd never amount to anything because who would hire someone like that? Little did they know, I've been their anonymous boss for 3 years. And tomorrow morning, I'm calling an all-hands meeting that will change everything. If you've ever been underestimated because of a disability, hit that like button and subscribe for this story of ultimate workplace justice. Growing up in a working class family in East Los Angeles, I was always the odd one out. My Tourette syndrome manifested when I was 7 years old, starting with simple vocal tics that my extended family found annoying rather than concerning. While my cousins played together at family gatherings, I sat alone in corners, trying to suppress the involuntary sounds and movements that made everyone uncomfortable. My parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, worked double shifts to keep our small apartment. Mom cleaned office buildings at night while Dad loaded trucks at the warehouse during the day. They barely had time to understand my condition, let alone advocate for me at school or family events. The medical bills from specialists and therapy sessions drained what little savings they had. At Roosevelt Elementary, teachers automatically assumed I was disruptive and placed me in the back of classrooms. Emma can't focus, they told my parents during conferences, never acknowledging that my brain worked differently, not poorly, but I proved them wrong semester after semester. My report card from 3rd grade, which I still keep in my office safe, shows straight A's despite their low expectations. The extended Rodriguez family saw me as the problem child. At birthday parties and holidays, my aunts would whisper about my behavioral issues while my cousins ran freely around the house. Uncle Miguel once suggested I needed more discipline, not understanding that Tourette's isn't something you can spank away. My cousin Jake, 3 years older, was the golden child everyone adored. He played soccer, had perfect grades, and never caused trouble. When I'd have tic episodes at family gatherings, Jake would roll his eyes and make comments about me being weird. Even then, I noticed how adults laughed at his cruelty rather than correcting it. But in the quiet of my bedroom, surrounded by library books and a secondhand computer my parents bought for $50, I discovered my refuge. While other kids played video games, I taught myself programming languages. While they watched TV, I solved complex math problems for fun. The same hyperfocus that intensified my tics also gave me an incredible ability to absorb information and see patterns others missed. By 5th grade, I was solving algebra problems that high school students struggled with. My teachers finally started noticing that the problem child was actually gifted. Mrs. Henderson, my first teacher who saw past my tics, nominated me for the district's advanced placement program. That recommendation changed everything. My parents were proud but worried. "Mia, you're so smart," Mom would say, "but will people accept you?" Dad was more practical. "Just keep your head down and work hard. Show them what you can do." I took their advice to heart, but I also made myself a promise. Someday I would be in a position where no one could make me feel small because of my differences. Someday, I would be the one making decisions about who deserved respect and who didn't. That someday was coming sooner than my family could imagine. Getting into MIT felt surreal. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while my parents were at work. I sat in our tiny kitchen, reading and rereading the words that would change my life forever. When I called to tell my family, the reactions were mixed. My parents cried with joy, but several relatives questioned whether I'd actually survive at such a prestigious school. She'd probably drop out. I overheard Aunt Carmen telling my mother, "Kids like Emma don't belong at places like that. Kids like me." She meant kids with disabilities, kids who didn't fit their narrow definition of normal. The transition to Cambridge was brutal initially. My tics intensified under stress, and I'd never been around so many brilliant minds who also questioned my presence. But within months, I found my rhythm. Computer science became my sanctuary. Code didn't judge me for my vocal tics or sudden head movements. Algorithms didn't care about my appearance. Results spoke louder than prejudice. During my sophomore year, I met Marcus Thompson in advanced programming theory. He was a tall, quiet black student from Detroit who understood what it felt like to be underestimated. When other students avoided partnering with me for group projects, assuming my tics would be distracting, Marcus approached me directly. "You solved that sorting problem in 30 seconds, he said after class one day. "I've been working on it for 3 hours. Want to be study partners?" Marcus became my closest friend and eventually my business partner. He never once mentioned my Tourette's unless I brought it up first. Instead, he focused on my ability to see solutions others missed, my persistence through problems that frustrated our classmates, and my innovative approaches to complex coding challenges. Junior year, we developed an idea for streamlining data processing in cloud systems. What started as a class project evolved into something revolutionary. We spent nights in the computer lab surviving on energy drinks and pizza, building what would eventually become the foundation of TechFlow solutions. Meanwhile, my family remained oblivious to my achievements. At holiday breaks, they'd ask basic questions like, "How's school?" but never showed genuine interest in my major or projects. When I tried explaining my research, eyes glazed over. Jake, now in his senior year at community college, still commanded more attention and praise for his mediocre grades than I received for my Dean's List recognition. "Emma's always been book smart," Aunt Rosa would say dismissively. "But that doesn't mean she knows how the real world works." The real world I was learning was exactly where I excelled by senior year. Marcus and I had refined our technology enough to enter MIT's business plan competition. We won first place and $100,000 in seed funding. The local newspaper ran a small article about our victory, but when I showed it to my family, the response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, Mia," my father said, clearly not understanding the significance. My cousins barely looked up from their phones. Graduation day arrived in May 2015. My parents drove cross-country to attend, bursting with pride as I walked across the stage with my computer science degree. The MIT diploma now hangs in my corner, off as a reminder of how far I've traveled from that small apartment in East LA. But even as I posed for photos in my cap and gown, I felt the familiar sting of family indifference. While other graduates celebrated with extended family, mine seemed eager to return home. They attended because it was expected, not because they truly understood what I'd accomplished. That disconnect planted a seed in my mind. If my family couldn't appreciate my potential, maybe it was time to stop seeking their approval. Instead, I would focus on building something so undeniably successful that their opinions became irrelevant. Marcus and I moved to Silicon Valley that summer, ready to transform our college project into a real company. Neither of us knew that within a decade, TechFlow would employ thousands of people, including 12 Rodriguez cousins who still saw me as twitchy Emma from family dinners. Silicon Valley in 2015 was a pressure cooker of ambition and innovation. Marcus and I rented a cramped studio apartment in Palo Alto, sleeping on air mattresses and living off ramen noodles while we pitched our idea to anyone who would listen. Our cloud data processing technology was revolutionary, but convincing investors to take a chance on two unknown graduates proved challenging. The breakthrough came during our 47th pitch meeting. Jennifer Walsh, a partner at Sequoia Capital, saw what others missed. "Your algorithm reduces processing time by 73% while cutting costs in half," she said, studying our demonstration. "That's not incremental improvement. That's disruption." 3 weeks later, we signed our Series A funding agreement, $50 million. The business plan that secured that investment sits framed in my office today, representing the moment our academic project became a real company. We hired our first 10 employees by December 2015, working out of a converted warehouse in Menlo Park. I handled product development while Marcus managed operations. My Tourette's actually became an advantage in the tech world, where neurodiversity was increasingly recognized as valuable. My hyperfocus helped me debug code for 18 hours straight, and my pattern recognition abilities led to breakthrough optimizations that our competitors couldn't replicate by 2017. TechFlow had grown to 200 employees and was processing data for major corporations like Netflix and Airbnb. We secured Series B funding of $150 million, valuing the company at $800 million. The tech press started calling us the next big thing. But my family back home remained largely unaware of my success. During this period, something interesting began happening. My cousins, now college graduates themselves, started applying for jobs in tech companies. Jake had barely graduated from Cal State Northridge with a marketing degree. My cousin Sophia finished a computer programming boot camp. Others were seeking entry-level positions at various tech firms. That's when I made a decision that I still question today. Instead of revealing my identity and offering them direct opportunities, I instructed our HR department to consider their applications through normal channels. Using pseudonyms and shell companies to mask my involvement, Jake was the first to get hired, landing a junior marketing coordinator position at TechFlow in early 2018. His resume was mediocre, but we needed warm bodies for our rapid expansion. During his phone interview, he bragged about his family connections in tech, presumably referring to his perception of me as a tech secretary or something equally dismissive. Sophia joined 6 months later as a junior developer. Her coding skills were basic, but our training program could bring her up to speed. Then came Miguel Jr., Rosa's son Diego, and eventually 8 more cousins across various departments: customer service, sales, data entry, quality assurance. None of them connected the dots. Our company directory listed me as E. Rodriguez, CEO, but they assumed it was coincidence. When HR mentioned our CEO was young and had started the company fresh out of college, they never imagined it could be their weird cousin Emma. I watched them from a distance, making note of their work ethics and attitudes. Jake consistently showed up late and spent hours on social media. Sophia was more dedicated but complained constantly about company policies. Miguel Jr. was reliable but unremarkable. Most of them treated their TechFlow jobs as temporary stepping stones to better opportunities. Meanwhile, the company continued its meteoric rise. We expanded internationally, opened offices in New York and London, and acquired 3 smaller competitors. By 2020, TechFlow was valued at $1.2 billion, making Marcus and me the youngest billionaires in Silicon Valley. The irony wasn't lost on me. At family gatherings, my cousins would complain about their jobs, their bosses, and their career prospects, not knowing they were talking to the person who ultimately controlled their professional fates. They'd make jokes about corporate executives who don't understand real work, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd built the company they worked for from the ground up. My parents knew I was successful. The expensive gifts I sent and the nice apartment I helped them buy made that clear, but they didn't grasp the full extent of my achievements. When I tried explaining that I'd founded and was running a major corporation, they'd nod politely but change the subject quickly, as if my success made them uncomfortable. The psychological complexity of employing my extended family while maintaining anonymity created an odd dynamic. Part of me wanted to help them advance their careers, but another part resented their continued dismissal of my capabilities. They worked for me, depended on me for their livelihoods, yet still treated me like the problem child at family events. This arrangement might have continued indefinitely, if not for what happened at Thanksgiving 2024. Their cruelty that day forced me to confront a painful truth. I'd been enabling their disrespect by hiding my success. By allowing them to mock me while secretly providing for them, I'd created a situation where they could have their cake and eat it too. That realization changed everything. The business plan that built TechFlow was based on disrupting established systems that weren't working. Now it was time to disrupt the toxic family dynamics that had held me back for too long. The Rodriguez family hierarchy was established long before I was born, cemented through decades of favoritism, financial dependence, and willful ignorance. Understanding this toxic structure is crucial to comprehending Why Thanksgiving 2024 became my breaking point. At the top sat my grandparents, Abuela Rosa and Abuelo Miguel, who immigrated from Mexico in the 1960s. They worshipped traditional values. Men were breadwinners, women were homemakers, and children with differences were sources of shame to be hidden or fixed. Their attitudes trickled down through 3 generations, creating a family culture where conformity was rewarded and deviation was punished. My father, Carlos, was the middle child of 5 siblings, which placed our immediate family in a precarious position. We weren't wealthy enough to command automatic respect, but we weren't poor enough to receive sympathy either. Dad's siblings had either achieved more traditional success or produced children who better fit the family mold. Uncle Miguel, the eldest son, owned a small construction company and was considered the family's success story. His son, Miguel Jr., inherited the golden child status: tall, handsome, athletic, and neurotypical. Aunt Carmen married a dentist and lived in a sprawling house in the suburbs. Her daughter Sophia was beautiful, popular, and everything I was not. Then there was Uncle Roberto, whose son Jake embodied everything the family valued in young men: confident, charismatic, and conventionally successful. Jake played football in high school, dated the prettiest girls, and carried himself with a swagger that comes from never being questioned or challenged. The family photo from my graduation 10 years ago tells the entire story. It sits in my office drawer, a reminder of how little things have changed. In the picture, taken at a cousin's birthday party, the seating arrangement reveals everything. The golden children, Jake, Sophia, Miguel Jr., and their siblings, cluster around my grandparents, soaking up attention and praise. Their parents beam with pride, sharing stories of achievements and accomplishments. Meanwhile, I'm positioned at the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, my parents beside me with forced smiles. Even in photographs, I was an afterthought, included out of obligation rather than celebration. This hierarchy manifested in countless ways throughout my childhood and adolescence. At Christmas, the golden children received expensive gifts while I got practical items like clothes and school supplies. During family dinners, their achievements were celebrated with toasts and applause, while my academic honors were acknowledged with brief nods and quick subject changes. The pattern was always the same: minimize Emma's successes, maximize everyone else's. When I won the state science fair in high school, the conversation quickly shifted to Jake's football playoffs. When I got into MIT, the focus turned to Sophia's acceptance to community college, which was apparently more realistic and showed she had her feet on the ground. But the most insidious aspect of this hierarchy was how it trained me to accept diminished expectations. For years, I internalized their messages that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention I received. I learned to celebrate small acknowledgments as major victories and to blame myself when family members treated me poorly. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and consistent. When I'd express hurt over being excluded or ignored, I'd be told I was too sensitive or making everything about myself. When I'd share achievements, I'd be reminded to stay humble and not show off. The message was clear: know your place and stay in it. Previous Thanksgiving gatherings followed predictable scripts. The golden children would arrive with fanfare, their latest accomplishments dominating conversation. Parents would compete to share their children's successes, each trying to outdo the others. Meanwhile, I'd sit quietly, listening to stories about promotions, relationships, and achievements that I couldn't share without being accused of bragging. The cruel behavior escalated gradually over the years. What started as dismissive comments evolved into active mockery. Jake began making jokes about my tics during family gatherings, initially subtle enough to seem like playful teasing. Other cousins would laugh, encouraging him to continue. "Emma's just different," they'd say, as if that explained away their cruelty. "You know how she is." The normalization of this behavior was perhaps the most damaging aspect. When I'd object to their jokes or comments, I'd be told I was overreacting. When I'd leave family events early to avoid further humiliation, I'd be accused of being antisocial. The family dynamic required me to accept abuse gracefully while protecting everyone else from the consequences of their actions. By 2024, this Pattern had become so entrenched that my cousins felt completely comfortable mocking my disability in public, filming it for social media, and expecting me to laugh along. They'd spent decades treating me as less than human, and I'd spent decades allowing it to continue. But they had no idea that their victim had become their provider. They mocked the hand that fed them, dismissed the person who signed their paychecks, and ridiculed the woman who could determine their professional futures with a single decision. The family hierarchy that had oppressed me for 32 years was about to be completely inverted, and they had no one to blame but themselves. The board meeting that changed my life took place on a foggy Tuesday morning in September 2021. Marcus and Ma sat across from 7 of the most powerful venture capitalists and tech executives in Silicon Valley, discussing TechFlow's future leadership structure. Our company had grown to 8,000 employees and was preparing for an IPO that would value us at over $2 billion. The question isn't whether Emma should be CEO, said Jennifer Walsh, our lead investor. The question is why she isn't CEO already. For 6 years, I held the title of Chief Technology Officer while Marcus served as CEO. It was a decision we'd made early on, thinking his traditional business background would inspire more confidence in investors. But as our technology became the clear differentiator in the market, and as my leadership abilities became undeniable, the board unanimously agreed it was time for a change. The CEO appointment letter sits framed in my office today, signed by all 7 board members. It reads, "The Board of Directors of TechFlow Solutions unanimously appoints Emma Rodriguez as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Her vision, technical expertise, and leadership have been instrumental in the company's success, and we believe she is uniquely qualified to lead TechFlow into its next phase of growth." Marcus transitioned to President and Co., a role that better suited his operational strengths. The change was seamless professionally, but it created an interesting personal dynamic. Suddenly, I wasn't just successful. I was a person making final decisions for a company that employed thousands of people, including 12 members of my extended family. My first major decision as CEO was expanding our diversity and inclusion initiatives. Having experienced discrimination firsthand, I was determined to create a workplace where neurodiversity was celebrated rather than tolerated. We implemented comprehensive accommodations for employees with disabilities, mandatory bias training for all managers, and a zero-tolerance policy for harassment of any kind. The irony wasn't lost on me that these policies directly protected my cousins from the kind of treatment they regularly subjected me to at family gatherings. Jake, working in marketing, benefited from our inclusive environment while continuing to mock my differences. Sophia, now a mid-level developer, thrived in our supportive tech culture while dismissing my abilities as just luck. By 2022, TechFlow had become one of the fastest-growing companies in Silicon Valley. We acquired 2 major competitors, expanded into artificial intelligence and machine learning, and signed contracts with Fortune 500 companies worldwide. The success was intoxicating, but it also created a strange parallel existence at work. I was Emma Rodriguez, CEO, commanding respect from industry leaders, making decisions that affected thousands of lives, and building technology that changed how the world processed information. At family gatherings, I was still twitchy Emma, the weird cousin who somehow had a job in tech. It probably wasn't very important. The decision to hire my cousins through our standard recruitment process, rather than revealing my identity, stemmed from a complex mix of motivations. Part of me genuinely wanted to help them find good jobs in a growing industry. Another part was curious to see how they'd perform without the family dynamics that had always defined our relationships. But if I'm being completely honest, there was also a darker impulse at play. I wanted to test whether their treatment of me would change if they knew the truth about my success. Would they suddenly respect me if they discovered I was their boss? Or would they find new ways to diminish my achievements? The hiring process revealed interesting patterns. Jake's application was filled with exaggerations and half-truths, but his interview charisma got him through the screening process. Sophia was genuinely skilled but constantly compared herself to others, a trait I recognized from our childhood. Miguel Jr. was dependable but lacked ambition, content to do the minimum required work. Watching them navigate TechFlow's culture was fascinating and frustrating. They complained about policies I'd personally implemented, criticized leadership decisions I'd made, and gossiped about executives they'd never met. During video calls with various departments, I'd sometimes see them in the background completely, unaware that their CEO was observing their work habits. The psychological toll of this dual existence was significant. I was essentially living a double life, maintaining relationships with people who respected my professional abilities, while enduring abuse from family members who had no idea those two identities were connected. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, helped me understand the complexity of my situation. "You're protecting yourself from their rejection," she explained during one session. "By hiding your success, you avoid the risk of them dismissing your achievements directly. But you're also denying yourself the validation you deserve." She was right, but I wasn't ready to reveal the truth. Not yet. The power imbalance felt too delicious, too perfect. They needed jobs, and I provided them. They mocked my capabilities while depending on my leadership for their livelihoods. It was poetic justice in its purest form. As CEO, I implemented several policies that directly impacted my cousin's work experience. Our comprehensive benefits package, flexible work arrangements, and professional development opportunities were all initiatives I championed personally. They benefited from my leadership while continuing to treat me as if I were incapable of meaningful achievement. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. At our quarterly all-hands meetings, they'd listen to presentations about company vision and values that I'd written personally. They'd participate in team-building exercises designed by programs I'd approved. They'd collect paychecks signed by accounting systems I'd implemented. Yet, at the next family dinner, they'd dismiss my career as just some tech job and make jokes about my appearance and mannerisms. This strange arrangement might have continued indefinitely if they hadn't crossed a line that made their continued employment impossible. Their behavior at Thanksgiving 2024 wasn't just personally hurtful, it was a direct violation of the harassment policies I'd created to protect all our employees. As CEO, I had a responsibility to enforce those policies consistently, regardless of personal relationships. The appointment letter that gave me this authority also gave me the obligation to create a workplace free from the kind of discrimination I'd endured my entire life. They were about to learn that actions have consequences, and that the weird cousin they'd mocked for decades was now in a position to hold them accountable. Thanksgiving 2024 started like every other family gathering, with me dreading the inevitable humiliation while hoping this time might be different. I drove to Aunt Carmen's house in Riverside, the same sprawling suburban home where I'd endured decades of dismissive comments and cruel jokes. The irony that I could now afford to buy 10 houses, like it wasn't lost on me. I arrived at 2 p.m., carrying homemade desserts I'd spent the morning baking. As usual, my contributions were set aside, with polite thanks, while store-bought items from my cousins were praised enthusiastically. Sophia brought the most beautiful pies from that expensive bakery, Aunt Carmen announced, while my apple crisp sat ignored on the counter. The seating arrangement told the familiar story. The golden children claimed spots at the main table while I was relegated to the kids' table, despite being 32 years old and more successful than anyone in the room. But I'd learned long ago to pick my battles. So I sat quietly between my teenage nephew and his girlfriend, listening to adult conversation from the periphery. Jake arrived fashionably late, as always, commanding attention with stories about his latest marketing campaigns. He'd been promoted to senior marketing coordinator at TechFlow 6 months earlier, a promotion I'd personally approved, hoping increased responsibility might mature him. Instead, it seemed to inflate his ego further. "Tech industry is so easy," he bragged, not knowing his CEO was sitting 10 feet away. "These Silicon Valley types think they're geniuses, but most of them just got lucky. Real business happens in traditional industries." Sophia nodded agreement, adding her own commentary about overpaid tech bros who didn't understand real work. Miguel Jr. chimed in with complaints about his company's leadership, describing them as out-of-touch executives who've never done actual jobs. I bit my tongue, focusing on my food while listening to my employees criticize the company I'd built from nothing. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They were literally complaining about me, to me, completely unaware of the irony. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was reaching for the salt when a mild tic caused my hand to jerk suddenly. It wasn't unusual. Stress always intensified my Tourette symptoms, but it knocked over my water glass, spilling liquid across the table. "Oops, sorry," I said, grabbing napkins to clean up the mess. My hand just, "There goes twitchy Emma again." Jake interrupted, his voice carrying across both tables. "Can't even handle basic motor functions." The room fell silent for a moment before nervous laughter rippled through the gathering. But Jake wasn't finished. He stood up, positioning himself where everyone could see him, and began an exaggerated imitation of my movements. "Look at me. I'm Emma," he said, jerking his head unnaturally and making clicking sounds with his tongue. "I can't control my body, but somehow I think I'm smart enough to work in tech." Other cousins began laughing, some covering their mouths to hide their amusement. Sophia pulled out her phone, initially to record Jake's performance, but he had a better idea. "Here, film me next to Emma," Jake said, moving to stand beside my chair. Side-by-side comparison. Normal person versus... He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air while making exaggerated tics that bore no resemblance to my actual symptoms. Sophia started recording, giggling as Jake performed his cruel caricature inches from my face. "This is going on my Instagram story," Jake announced. #family dinner, #why genetics are weird. The mockery escalated as other cousins joined in. Miguel Jr. began imitating my vocal tics, making random sounds and calling them Emma's greatest hits. Diego started jerking his shoulders, randomly claiming he was catching Emma's contagious weirdness. "Guys, that's enough," my mother said weakly from across the room, but her protest was ignored. "Oh, come on, Tia Maria," Jake replied. "Emma knows we're just playing. She's used to it by now. Aren't you twitchy?" The name hit me like a physical blow. They'd called me that since childhood, but hearing it now as a successful CEO, being mocked by my own employees, felt different. More degrading. More unforgivable. Besides, Sophia added while still filming, "It's not like Emma's ever going to amount to anything important. Who would hire someone who can't even sit still during dinner?" "Seriously," agreed Miguel Jr., "I can't imagine any company putting someone like that in charge of anything crucial. She'd probably tick her way through every meeting." Jake's performance reached its crescendo as he pretended to have a seizure, falling dramatically onto the floor while making loud theatrical sounds. "Help me," he gasped between fake convulsions. "I've got Emma syndrome." The room erupted in laughter. Even some of the adults were smiling, treating my public humiliation as harmless entertainment. My grandparents shook their heads with disapproval, but not at Jake's behavior, at my inability to take a joke. Sophia's phone captured everything. Jake's cruel mimicry, the family's delighted reactions, and my face burning with shame and rage. 23 seconds of footage that would serve as evidence of workplace harassment, though none of them knew it yet. "Post it," encouraged Diego. "Tag everyone so they can see Emma's special talents." "Already done," Sophia replied, typing quickly. On her phone, "This is hilarious. I bet it gets hundreds of likes." I sat frozen, watching my extended family treat my neurological condition as comedy material. These weren't strangers mocking me in the street. These were people who claimed to love me, who'd shared holidays and celebrations with me for 3 decades, who currently depended on my company for their livelihoods. The cruelty was breathtaking. In its casualness, they felt so comfortable with their superiority, so confident in their right to humiliate me, that they documented it for social media without a second thought. "Emma's always been the family entertainment," Aunt Rosa commented, as if I weren't sitting right there. "Remember when she was little and couldn't stop making those sounds during church? Father Martinez thought she was possessed." More laughter, more casual cruelty disguised as fond memories. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking with suppressed emotion. "I need some air," I managed to say, heading toward the back door. "Don't go far," Jake called after me. "I might need another performance for the TikTok crowd." As I stepped outside into the cool November evening, I heard Sophia's voice behind me. "Should we feel bad? She looks upset." "Emma's fine," Jake replied dismissively. "She's used to this stuff." Besides, we're family. Family can tease each other. Standing in my aunt's backyard looking at the same swing set where I'd hidden from family gatherings as a child, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone, the same device that contained direct lines to board members, investors, and industry leaders, and began documenting what had just happened. Jake's phone contained the video that would destroy his career. Sophia's social media posts would serve as evidence of harassment. Their words, witnessed by dozens of family members, would justify every consequence that followed. They'd finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and tomorrow morning, they'd learn. That twitchy Emma had more power than they ever imagined. I made it to my car before the tears started. Sitting in the parking lot of a Starbucks 3 blocks from my aunt's house, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my tics intensifying with each wave of emotion that crashed over me. 30-2 years old, CEO of a billion-dollar company, employer to thousands of people. And I was crying in a parking lot because my cousins had mocked my disability like we were still children. The rational part of my brain knew I should drive home, take a hot bath, and process this trauma properly. But the wounded child inside me wanted to stay hidden in this car forever, safe from the cruelty of people who were supposed to love me. Unconditionally, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How's family dinner? Surviving the annual Rodriguez interrogation about when you're getting married." I stared at his message, realizing he had no idea what I'd just endured. Marcus knew about my Tourette's, of course, but he'd never witnessed the systematic humiliation my family subjected me to. In his presence, I was confident, capable, respected. Tonight I felt like that 7-year-old girl hiding in corners while adults whispered about my behavioral problems. Instead of responding to Marcus immediately, I opened my notes app and began documenting everything I could remember from the evening. Jake's exact words, Sophia's filming, the specific gestures and sounds they'd used to mock my tics, the family members who'd laughed versus those who'd stayed silent, the social media posts that were probably already gaining likes and comments as I typed. My anger began replacing my hurt. This wasn't just family dysfunction anymore. This was documented workplace harassment. Jake, Sophia, Miguel Jr., and Diego had all violated TechFlow's anti-harassment policies while representing themselves as company employees on social media. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a screenshot from my cousin Patricia, who'd left the dinner early. She'd sent me Sophia's Instagram story, the video of Jake's performance, posted with laughing emojis and the caption, "Family dinner entertainment courtesy of our special cousin, #TwitchyEmma, #family drama, #Thanksgiving 2024. The video had already been viewed 847 times and received dozens of comments. I scrolled through them, each one feeling like a knife twist. "Oh my God, this is hilarious. Your cousin is so weird. Lol, is this real? That's actually sad. Family gatherings are the best. My professional reputation, my dignity, my neurological condition all reduced to social media entertainment for strangers who knew nothing about me or my achievements." I called Marcus. "Emma, you sound upset. What happened?" The concern in his voice almost made me cry again. For 6 years, Marcus had been the brother I'd never had, the friend who saw my worth when family couldn't. Hearing his genuine care after hours of casual cruelty nearly broke me. "They filmed it, Marcus. They actually filmed themselves mocking my tics and posted it online." Silence on the other end. "Then they what?" I recounted the entire evening, my voice growing steadier as I focused on facts rather than emotions. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds of disgust or disbelief. "Emma, I am so sorry. That's not just cruel, it's potentially illegal, and definitely grounds for termination if any of them work for us." "All of them work for us, Marcus. Every single cousin who participated tonight is a TechFlow employee." Another long silence. Jesus, they have no idea, do they? None. They think I'm just some secretary or low-level tech worker who got lucky. They have no clue that their special cousin signs their paychecks. Marcus's breathing changed, and I could hear him pacing. "Emma, this is serious, not just personally, but legally. They've created a hostile work environment, documented harassment, and potentially exposed the company to liability issues. I knew he was right, but hearing it confirmed felt both validating and terrifying. What do I do, Marcus? How do I handle this? First, document everything. Screenshots, witness statements, the whole thing. Second, we're calling an emergency meeting with HR and legal first thing Monday morning. Third, ... double quotes. He paused. Right. Third, you decide how much more of this you're willing to tolerate. After we hung up, I sat in that parking lot for another hour, watching normal families leave normal restaurants after normal holiday dinners. None of them were dealing with the complex dynamics of employing their abusers. None of them were trying to balance family loyalty with professional responsibility. My phone kept buzzing with notifications. The video was spreading beyond Sophia's. Immediate followers being shared and reshared across social media platforms. Comments ranged from amused to concerned to outright cruel. This is actually really mean. Why would you film this and post it? Some families are so toxic, imagine. If this person saw this video, if only they knew I was seeing it. If only they knew this special cousin they were mocking could end their careers with a single phone call. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. These same people who'd humiliated me tonight would show up to work Monday morning, sit in meetings. I'd authorize, use technology I'd developed, and collect salaries I'd approved. They'd participate in company culture initiatives I'd personally designed while continuing to treat me like a subhuman oddity at family gatherings. Marcus was right. I had to decide how much more I was willing to tolerate. The answer was becoming clearer with each passing minute. Not another day. I finally drove home to my penthouse apartment in downtown San Francisco. The city lights blurring through tears, I was finally allowing myself to shed. My living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and view of the bay, felt like a sanctuary after the suburban nightmare I'd just escaped. But even in my beautiful home, surrounded by awards and accolades that proved my worth, I couldn't shake the sound of their laughter or the image of Jake's cruel mimicry. Success hadn't protected me from their cruelty. It had only made the hypocrisy more painful. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop, pulling up TechFlow's employee handbook. The anti-harassment section I'd personally authored was comprehensive and clear. TechFlow maintains a zero-tolerance policy regarding harassment, discrimination, or hostile behavior based on disability, medical conditions, or any other protected characteristic. The policy applied to all employees, both on and off company premises. Social media posts that created hostile work environments were explicitly prohibited. Violations resulted in immediate termination by their own actions captured on video. And broadcast publicly, my cousins had terminated themselves. I just had to make it official. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for Monday morning's confrontation, knowing it would change family dynamics forever. But as I reviewed the harassment policy that would end their careers, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the power to protect myself. They'd spent 3 decades teaching me to accept abuse gracefully. Tomorrow, they'd learn that lesson was finally over. Monday morning arrived with unusual clarity. I'd spent the weekend oscillating between rage and resolve, but by dawn, I knew exactly what needed to happen. At 6 a.m., I was already in my office, preparing for the most important meeting of my professional life. Marcus arrived 30 minutes later, carrying coffee and the grim expression of someone who'd spent the weekend researching harassment law. Behind him came Jennifer Walsh, our lead board member and legal expert, followed by Rachel Morrison, our Chief Human Resources Officer. "Before we begin," I said, closing my office door, "I need everyone to understand that what I'm about to share involves my family members. But that doesn't change our legal obligations or company policies." I'd prepared a comprehensive presentation documenting Thursday's incident. The first slide showed TechFlow's organizational chart with my cousin's positions highlighted: Jake Martinez in marketing, Sofia Rodriguez in development, Miguel Rodriguez Jr. in customer service, Diego Santos in quality assurance, and 8 others across various departments. "None of them know I'm the CEO," I explained, watching Jennifer's eyebrows rise. They think I'm some low-level tech worker who got lucky. Rachel pulled up their employment records on her tablet. All have satisfactory performance reviews. No previous harassment complaints. Standard employees in every measurable way. Until Thursday, I said, advancing to the next slide. I played Sophia's video for the legal team, watching their faces transform from curiosity to horror. Jake's exaggerated mimicry of my tics. The family's delighted laughter. The cruel commentary about my employability. It was all there in high definition, clarity. This is textbook hostile work environment harassment, Jennifer said, pausing the video, based on disability status, documented on social media, involving multiple company employees. Marcus had spent the weekend screenshotting everything before it could be deleted. Sophia's Instagram story, Jake's shared posts, comments from other family members. We had a complete digital trail of the harassment and its viral spread. The legal implications are severe, Jennifer continued, reviewing our documentation. This creates liability for TechFlow if we don't respond appropriately. Any employee who saw this content could claim we maintain a hostile work environment. Rachel was already pulling up our employee handbook on her laptop. Section 4.3 clearly states that harassment based on disability is grounds for immediate termination. Section 4.7 extends this to social media activity that affects workplace environment. I'd written those policies myself, never imagining I'd be their primary beneficiary. But watching my legal team confirm that my cousins had violated every protection I'd fought to implement felt like poetic justice. There's another factor, I added, showing them the viral metrics. Sophia's video has been viewed over 5,000 times and shared 200+ times. Several TechFlow employees have seen it. I've gotten sympathetic messages from coworkers who recognized me. This was the smoking gun. Other employees had witnessed their colleagues harassing their CEO, creating exactly the toxic environment our policies were designed to prevent. Marcus leaned forward. Emma, we need to discuss something difficult. Even though they're family, even though you want to handle this delicately, we have legal obligations. If we don't terminate them, we could face discrimination lawsuits from other employees. Jennifer nodded agreement. If word spreads that we allowed documented harassment to go unpunished, it undermines every diversity initiative we've implemented. Other disabled employees could rightfully claim we don't enforce our own policies. I'd anticipated this argument, but hearing it confirmed my decision. This wasn't about revenge. It was about integrity. Either our anti-harassment policies meant something or they were meaningless corporate theater. I want them terminated, I said clearly. All of them. Today. Rachel consulted her notes. For termination with cause, we need clear policy violations, documented evidence, and witness statements. We have the first two covered. 4 witnesses had already considered this. 23 family members saw the live harassment. The video provides additional witnesses through social media views. Several TechFlow employees have already contacted me about it. The social media evidence is particularly damning, Jennifer added. They voluntarily documented their harassment and broadcast it publicly. No employee can claim they didn't know their behavior was inappropriate. We spent the next hour crafting termination letters that were legally bulletproof. Each letter referenced specific policy violations, included timestamps from the harassment incident, and cited the social media documentation as evidence. Jake Martinez terminated for harassment based on disability status, in violation of company policy 4.3, as evidenced by social media posts dated November 23, 2024. Sophia Rodriguez terminated for creating hostile work environment and social media harassment, in violation of company policies 4.3 and 4.7. The language was clinical, professional, and utterly final. Marcus raised a practical concern. How do we handle the logistics? 12 terminations simultaneously will raise questions. Emergency all-hands meeting, I decided. We'll address the harassment publicly, discuss our zero-tolerance policies, and make it clear that no employee is above accountability. Jennifer smiled grimly. Sends a powerful message about company culture. Leadership taking harassment seriously even when it involves personal relationships. Rachel was already coordinating with IT security to revoke access credentials and with facilities to retrieve company property. The termination process at TechFlow was efficient and thorough. I designed it myself to protect the company from disgruntled former employees. One more thing, I said, pulling up the final piece of evidence. Jake's phone contains the original video file. As company property issued through our device program, we can legally access it. The phone had been provided through TechFlow's employee device program, making its contents company property. IT could retrieve the original video along with any additional content that might be relevant. Perfect, Jennifer said. We'll have the complete harassment documentation from multiple sources with clear policy violations. No wrongful termination. Lawsuit would survive this evidence. As the meeting concluded, I felt a strange sense of calm. For 32 years, I'd absorbed my family's cruelty without recourse. For the first time in my life, I had the power to hold them accountable for their actions. Emma, Marcus said as others filed out, are you ready for the fallout? Your family won't understand. They'll accuse you of overreacting, of destroying lives over a harmless joke. I looked out my office window at the sprawling TechFlow campus, where thousands of employees worked in an environment I'd carefully crafted to be inclusive and respectful. My cousins had violated that environment while depending on my leadership for their livelihoods. They destroyed their own lives, I replied. I'm just enforcing the consequences. The employee handbook that would end their careers sat open on my desk, a document I'd authored to protect people exactly like me from treatment exactly like theirs. Today, those protections would finally protect their intended target, justice. It turned out was best served through policy manuals and termination letters. That afternoon, alone in my office after the legal team departed, I found myself staring at the termination letters that would end 12 careers by evening. The weight of what I was about to do hit me with unexpected force, and for the first time since Thursday night, I questioned whether I was making the right decision. These weren't just employees, they were family. Flawed, cruel family, but family. Nonetheless, Jake might be an entitled narcissist, but he was also the cousin who taught me to ride a bike when I was 8. Sophia could be casually dismissive, but she'd also defended me from neighborhood bullies in middle school. The complexity of our relationships couldn't be reduced to a simple victim-abuser narrative. I opened my therapy journal, a leather-bound notebook where I'd been processing family trauma with Dr. Kim for the past 3 years. The entries from recent months painted a clear pattern of escalating psychological abuse that I'd somehow normalized. August 15th, family barbecue. Jake made jokes about my twitching again. Everyone laughed. Pretended it was funny too. September 22nd, Sophia's birthday party. When I mentioned work promotion, conversation immediately shifted to her boyfriend's job. Felt invisible again. October 10, Uncle Miguel's retirement party. Diego imitated my tics during dinner. Aunt Carmen said I was too sensitive when I looked upset. Page after page documented the systematic erosion of my self-worth at family gatherings. But it also revealed something troubling about my own behavior. I'd been enabling their treatment by never setting clear boundaries or consequences. Dr. Kim had warned me about this dynamic during our last session. Emma, you're successful enough to change these patterns, but you keep returning to situations where you're diminished. Ask yourself what you're getting from maintaining relationships that hurt you. The honest answer was complicated. Part of me craved their approval despite their cruelty. Another part felt responsible for maintaining family unity even at my own expense. But the largest part, the part I was finally ready to acknowledge, was afraid that confronting them would confirm my worst fear, that they'd rather have no relationship with me than accept me as an equal. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Mia, Jake posted something mean about Thursday. Are you okay? She'd seen the video. My own mother had watched her nieces and nephews mock her daughter's disability for social media entertainment. The fact that she was asking if I was okay rather than demanding apologies from the perpetrators revealed everything about our family's power dynamics. I called her immediately. Mom, did you see what Jake and Sophia did? How they filmed themselves, making fun of my Tourette sis, Mia. It was very cruel. But you know how Jake is. He doesn't think before he acts. Maybe you could talk to him." The suggestion that I should be the one reaching out to my abuser was so absurd it took me a moment to respond. "Mom, they humiliated me publicly and posted it online. This isn't about Jake not thinking. This is about him not respecting me as a human being." "But Emma, they're family. Family forgives. You don't want to cause drama over a silly video?" Silly video? My mother had just characterized documented harassment as a silly video and suggested that maintaining fake peace was more important than my dignity. What if someone posted a video mocking Dad's diabetes and calling him names? Would that be a silly video? Silence. Then that's different, Emma. Your father's diabetes is serious. And my Tourette's isn't. I didn't say that. I just ... If you've always been strong, you don't let things bother you. This was the narrative that had enabled 32 years of abuse, that I was somehow immune to emotional damage, that my success meant I didn't need protection or support. My family had convinced themselves that my achievements made their cruelty harmless. After we hung up, I sat in my office feeling more isolated than ever. My own mother couldn't see the severity of what had happened. She couldn't understand. How could I expect my cousins to acknowledge the harm they'd caused? I opened my laptop and began researching family estrangement, trying to understand the psychological dynamics I was navigating. Article after article described similar patterns. Successful family members being dismissed or diminished by relatives who felt threatened by their achievements. Scapegoat children often carry family dysfunction while protecting other members from consequences. One psychology paper explained, when scapegoats achieve success, families may increase abusive behavior to maintain established hierarchies. The description fit perfectly. My success hadn't earned respect. It had intensified their need to diminish me. The more I achieved, the more they needed to prove I was still the problem child who didn't deserve recognition. Dr. Kim had helped me understand this pattern, but understanding it intellectually was different from experiencing it emotionally. Reading about family dysfunction was easier than actually dismantling the relationships that had shaped my entire identity. I pulled out a photo from my desk drawer. It's a family picture from 10 years ago that I'd mentioned earlier. Looking at it now with adult eyes, I could see the story it told. Me isolated at the edge while everyone else clustered together. My forced smile hiding years of accumulated pain. But I could also see something else in my younger face. Hope, despite everything they'd put me through. I'd still believe that someday things would change. That someday they'd see my worth and treat me accordingly. Thanksgiving 2024 had finally killed that hope. They'd had 3 decades to evolve, to recognize my humanity, to show basic respect for my differences. Instead, they'd chosen to film my humiliation for entertainment. I thought about Marcus's warning regarding family fallout. They would indeed accuse me of overreacting. They'd paint me as the vindictive relative who destroyed lives over a harmless joke. The family narrative would cast me as the villain, not the victim. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care about their narrative. I had my own story now. One where a successful woman refused to tolerate discrimination, even from family members. One where consequences matched actions and policies meant something more than empty corporate gestures. The termination letters represented more than professional discipline. They were boundary setting in its purest form. They said, you cannot abuse me and benefit from my success simultaneously. You cannot mock my disability while depending on my leadership. You cannot treat me as subhuman while expecting me to provide for your financial security. I'd spent 3 years in therapy learning to advocate for myself. I'd built policies to protect employees like me from treatment exactly like this. I'd created a company culture based on respect and inclusion. How could I maintain any integrity if I exempted my own abusers from the standards I demanded for everyone else? My phone buzzed with another notification. Someone else had shared Sophia's video. The harassment was continuing to spread, reaching more viewers, generating more comments about my appearance and capabilities. Every view represented another violation of my dignity, another data point in a pattern of systematic dehumanization. I picked up my pen and signed the first termination letter. Then the second, then all 12. Some boundaries, I realized, were too important to negotiate. Some relationships were too toxic to preserve. Some decisions required choosing your own humanity over other people's comfort. They'd taught me to accept cruelty as love, dismissal as care, and abuse as family bonding. But they'd never taught me how to protect myself when their lessons became unbearable. Today, I was finally learning that lesson for myself. Tuesday morning brought the machinery of corporate justice into motion. By 7 a.m., I was reviewing the final all-hands meeting agenda with my executive team, preparing for what would become the most significant company-wide address in TechFlow's history. We need this to feel educational, not punitive, Rachel advised. Adjusting the presentation slides. Frame it as reinforcing our values, not targeting specific individuals. The meeting agenda was carefully crafted to serve multiple purposes. Educate employees about harassment policies, demonstrate leadership accountability, and provide legal cover for the terminations. Every element had been vetted by our legal team to ensure we couldn't be accused of public humiliation or wrongful termination. Marcus had spent Monday evening coordinating logistics with military precision. The main auditorium was booked for 10 a.m. All employees were required to attend, either in person or via video conference. Security had been briefed on potential disruptions. IT was standing by to revoke access credentials immediately following the announcements. The beauty of this approach, Jennifer explained during our final legal review, is that your cousins will terminate themselves publicly. When you reveal your identity and play their harassment video, they'll have no defense. The presentation began with TechFlow's mission statement and values, emphasizing our commitment to inclusive workplace culture. Slide 3 outlined our anti-harassment policies in detail, with specific examples of prohibited behavior. Slide 4 discussed social media responsibilities for company employees. None of this would surprise my cousins. They'd sat through similar presentations during their onboarding processes, but they'd never connected those policies to their treatment of family members outside work hours. The personal revelation comes at slide 7. I explained to my team, that's when I identify myself as the harassment victim and explain the connection to company employees. My hands were surprisingly steady as I rehearsed the key moment. Some of you may have seen a video circulating on social media showing a young woman with Tourette syndrome being mocked and filmed by family members. That woman is your CEO. Those family members are your colleagues. Rachel had prepared individual termination meetings to follow the all-hands presentation. Each cousin would be called 2 separate conference rooms simultaneously, preventing them from coordinating responses or creating additional disruptions. Jake Martinez, 2 conference room, a Sofia Rodriguez, 2 conference room B, and so on. 12 conversations happening simultaneously across the building. Following the same script. Policy violation, documented evidence. Immediate termination. I'd insisted on conducting Jake's termination personally, as the primary instigator. And video creator, his behavior was the most egregious. And I wanted to look him in the eye when his world collapsed. The security implications were significant. Marcus worried about potential retaliation, either physical or legal. We'd coordinated with building security to escort terminated employees from the premises immediately. Their access cards would be deactivated before they left the conference rooms. Emma, Marcus said during our final preparation meeting, once you reveal your identity, there's no going back. Your relationship with your extended family will never recover from this. I'd spent Monday night accepting that reality. Some relationships were too toxic to preserve, and some secrets were too burdensome to maintain. The psychological relief of finally being authentic outweighed the grief of losing connections that had never truly supported me. Dr. Kim had helped me understand this dynamic during an emergency session Monday evening. You've been managing multiple identities for years, she explained. Professional Emma, who's respected and successful, and family Emma, who's diminished and mocked. Integration means accepting that you can't be both versions simultaneously. The meeting agenda included a moment I'd been anticipating for years, revealing my full professional identity to people who'd spent decades underestimating my capabilities. They'd learned that twitchy Emma was actually their CEO, their decision maker, their provider. But more importantly, they'd learned that actions have consequences, even when the victim appears powerless to enforce them. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove to the office. The TechFlow campus looked the same as always. Modern glass buildings housing innovative technology and brilliant minds. But today it would also house a reckoning that had been 32 years in the making. I arrived early and walked through the building, observing my cousins at their workstations. Jake was already in the marketing department, chatting casually with colleagues who had no idea their conversation partner had filmed disability harassment for social media entertainment. Sophia was coding quietly in the development wing, focused on projects I'd personally approved. They looked so normal, so innocent in their professional roles. No one observing them would suspect they'd spend Thanksgiving evening treating their CEO like a circus attraction. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. These same people who'd mocked my neurological condition were now working in a company I'd built specifically to be inclusive and supportive of neurodiversity. They benefited from policies I'd created while actively violating the principles behind those policies. At 9:45 a.m., employees began filing into the main auditorium. I watched from my office window as my cousins walked past, probably assuming this would be another routine corporate presentation about quarterly results or new product launches. Jake was laughing with his marketing teammates, apparently unconcerned that his harassment video had been viewed thousands of times. Sophia looked slightly nervous, but more about missing work deadlines than facing professional consequences for her behavior. They had no idea. Their lives were about to change forever. My assistant knocked on my door. "Ms. Rodriguez, it's time. The auditorium is full, and the video conference has 847 participants logged in." I gathered my presentation materials and the sealed termination letters, feeling surprisingly calm. The decision had been made. The legal framework was solid. The moral justification was unquestionable. Walking toward the auditorium, I'd passed the framed company values displayed throughout the building: respect, innovation, integrity, inclusion. For 3 years, my cousins had violated every single value while collecting paychecks from the woman they'd systematically dehumanized. Today, those values would finally protect their intended beneficiary. The auditorium doors opened, revealing 2,000 employees waiting to hear from their CEO. In the third row, I could see Jake's distinctive profile. Sophia sat 2 rows behind him, checking her phone. Other cousins were scattered throughout the audience, completely unaware they were about to witness their own professional destruction. I stepped up to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces: brilliant engineers, innovative developers, dedicated support staff, and 12 people who'd never imagined that their family's scapegoat had become their ultimate authority figure. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this important company-wide meeting. Today, we're going to discuss our harassment policies, social media responsibilities, and the consequences of violating the inclusive culture we've worked so hard to build." In the audience, Jake was already looking bored. He'd attended similar presentations before, never suspecting they applied to his personal behavior. He was about to learn otherwise. The first few slides proceeded normally. I discussed TechFlow's growth, our commitment to inclusive workplace culture, and the importance of representing company values, both professionally and personally. In the audience, my cousins shifted restlessly, probably wondering why the CEO was wasting time on basic corporate messaging. Jake was texting on his phone. Sophia was doodling in her notebook. Miguel Jr. looked half asleep. None of them had any reason to pay attention. They'd heard similar presentations during onboarding and quarterly meetings. "Our anti-harassment policies exist to protect every employee," I continued, advancing to slide 4, "particularly those with disabilities, neurological differences, or other characteristics that make them targets for discrimination." A few heads nodded in the audience. TechFlow's commitment to neurodiversity was well known throughout the industry. We employed dozens of people with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and other neurological differences. My Tourette syndrome was just One example of the diversity we celebrated. These policies apply to all employee interactions, including social media activity that could create hostile work environments for colleagues. I said, watching Jake finally look up from his phone. Harassment documented online can be just as damaging as harassment that occurs in our offices. Sophia stopped doodling, probably remembering her Instagram post. But she still didn't connect my presentation to her personal behavior. The idea that her CEO might be the victim in her viral video was literally unthinkable. Recently, a video surfaced on social media showing several people mocking someone with Tourette syndrome. I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The harassment was filmed, posted online, and shared widely for entertainment purposes. Now I had everyone's attention. The auditorium fell silent as employees realized we were discussing a specific incident, not theoretical harassment scenarios. In the third row, Jake's face went pale. He was finally understanding that his harmless family video had reached professional attention, but he still didn't grasp the full implications. He thought his CEO had somehow seen the video and decided to use it as a teaching example. The behavior in this video represents everything TechFlow stands against, I said, clicking to slide 7. It shows people mocking neurological differences, treating disability as entertainment, and creating content designed to humiliate someone based on medical conditions. Sophia was now staring directly at me, her face flushed with recognition. She'd posted the video. She knew exactly what incident I was describing. But like Jake, she assumed I'd simply discovered their content and decided to address it professionally. Makes this particularly troubling, I continued, is that the people filming this harassment are TechFlow employees. They violated our policies while representing our company on social media platforms. The auditorium erupted in whispers. Employees began looking around, trying to identify which colleagues had created the harassment video. My cousins sat frozen, finally realizing their behavior had professional implications. This was the moment I'd rehearsed hundreds of times in my mind. I clicked to slide 8, which showed a screenshot from Sophia's Instagram story. Jake's performance frozen at its trees. Performance frozen at its most cruel moment. Some of you may recognize this image, I said calmly. Shows me your CEO being mocked by family members who happen to be your colleagues. The silence was deafening. 2,000 people processing the revelation that their respected leader was the victim in a harassment video they might have seen online. Heads turned throughout the auditorium as employees tried to locate the perpetrators. Jake's mouth fell open. Sophia covered her face with her hands. Miguel Jr. looked like he might vomit. Other cousins scattered throughout the audience were having similar reactions of shock and horror. The people filming this harassment, I continued, had no idea. They were mocking their CEO. They saw only a family member they felt entitled to humiliate. They never imagined that their victim had the authority to hold them accountable. I clicked to the next slide, showing the company org chart with my cousins. Positions highlighted. Jake Martinez, Marketing. Sofia Rodriguez, Development. Miguel Rodriguez Jr., Customer Service. 8 other family members across various departments. The auditorium was completely silent now. Employees were staring at my identified cousins with expressions ranging from disgust to disbelief. The people they'd worked alongside, eaten lunch with, and collaborated on projects had filmed their CEO being harassed. All of these employees violated our harassment policies, I said, my voice growing stronger. They created hostile work environment conditions, engaged in disability discrimination, and documented their behavior on social media platforms. Jake tried to stand up, probably to apologize or explain, but I continued speaking before he could. Interrupt. This behavior would be unacceptable if directed at any employee. It's particularly egregious when directed at leadership. Most importantly, it's exactly the kind of discrimination our policies were designed to prevent. I could see my cousins desperately trying to make eye contact with me, their faces pleading for mercy or understanding. But I'd spent 32 years accepting their apologies and empty promises to do better next time. Effective immediately, I announced all employees involved in this harassment have been terminated for cause. Their access to company systems has been revoked, and they will be escorted from the premises following this meeting. The auditorium exploded. Gasps, murmurs, and shocked exclamations filled the space as employees processed the announcement. 12 terminations announced simultaneously in front of the entire company. It was unprecedented. Jake finally managed to stand, his face red with panic. Emma, wait, you can't. This is family security guards appeared at the ends of each row, moving toward the identified employees. Rachel Morrison's voice came through the sound system. Jake Martinez, Sofia Rodriguez, Miguel Rodriguez Jr., and all other identified employees, please proceed immediately to your assigned conference rooms. Sofia was crying now, probably realizing that her social media post had just cost her career. Miguel Jr. sat frozen in his seat, unable to process the rapid destruction of his professional life. For everyone else, I continued over the chaos. This demonstrates that our policies apply equally to all employees. Harassment will not be tolerated regardless of personal relationships or circumstances. As security began escorting my cousins from the auditorium, Jake turned back toward the stage, his voice carrying over the crowd. Emma, please. We didn't know. We're family. I stepped closer to the microphone, my voice carrying clearly through the speakers. You're right, Jake. You didn't know who I was professionally, but you knew exactly who I was personally. A family member with a disability who deserved basic respect. That should have been enough. The auditorium watched in stunned silence as my cousins were led away, their TechFlow careers ending in the same public forum where they'd learned their victims' true identity. I clicked to the final slide. Questions about today's announcement should be directed to HR. Thank you for your attention and your continued commitment to TechFlow's values. As employees filed out, many approached the stage to offer support or ask questions. Several shared their own experiences with family harassment, thanking me for taking a public stand. But I barely heard their words. I was watching the empty seats where my cousins had been sitting moments before, processing the finality of what had just occurred. 32 years of family dysfunction had just been resolved in 30 minutes. The cousins who'd mocked Twitchy. Emma had been terminated by CEO Emma Rodriguez. The power dynamic that had shaped my entire life had been permanently reversed. Marcus appeared at my side as the auditorium emptied. How do you feel? I considered his question, surprised by my own answer. Free. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. Conference room A felt sterile and cold as I entered, carrying Jake's termination letter and the evidence file that would end his career. He was already seated, flanked by Rachel from HR and 2 security guards. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the desperate confusion of someone whose world had just collapsed. Emma, he said, starting to stand. Thank God you're here. There's been some terrible mistakes. Sit down, Jake, I said calmly, taking the seat across from him. It's no mistake. I placed my company ID badge on the table between us, the executive badge that proved beyond doubt who I really was. Jake stared at it like it might transform into something else if he looked hard enough. I don't understand, he whispered. You single quotes read ... You're really the CEO. The actual CEO. I founded this company with Marcus Thompson 7 years ago. I've been CEO for 3 years. You've been working for me since 2018. The color drained from his face as the implications hit him. Every dismissive comment about his bosses, every complaint about company policies, every casual insult about overpaid tech executives, all delivered directly to the person he was criticizing. But you're just Emma. You're Twitchy Emma. From family dinners, you can't be ... I can't be what, Jake? Successful, intelligent, capable of running a company. He opened and closed his mouth several times, struggling to reconcile his image of me with reality. For 32 years, he'd seen me as inferior, damaged, less than human. The cognitive dissonance was breaking his brain. Rachel slid the harassment report across the table. Mr. Martinez, we're here to discuss your violation of company policy regarding workplace harassment. Jake grabbed the document, scanning it desperately. This is about Thanksgiving. That was just family stuff. That wasn't work-related. You filmed and posted harassment of your CEO on social media while identifying yourself as a TechFlow employee, I explained. That makes it very work-related, but I didn't know you were the CEO. If I'd known if you'd known, you would have treated me with basic human respect. The only reason you'd stop mocking my disability is if it might hurt your career. He started to object, then stopped, realizing how that sounded. Emma, come on, we're family. You know, I didn't mean anything by it. It was just ... You know how I am. Yes, Jake. I know exactly how you are. That's why we're having this conversation. I opened the evidence file and spread its contents across the table. Screenshots of his social media posts, witness statements from Thanksgiving dinner, the viral metrics showing how widely his harassment had spread. Your video has been viewed 8,000 times, I said. Several TechFlow employees have seen it and filed complaints with HR. You created a hostile work environment by publicly humiliating your CEO. Jake was sweating now, his shirt sticking to his back. Look, I'll delete the video. I'll post an apology. I'll do whatever you want. Just ... Please don't fire me. I need this job. The desperation in his voice was familiar. I'd heard similar tones from him throughout childhood whenever he faced consequences for his actions. But this time, I wasn't a powerless child who could be ignored or dismissed. You should have thought about needing this job before you filmed yourself mocking disabled people, I replied. But Emma, we're family. Can't destroy my career over one stupid video. I leaned forward, my voice deadly calm. Jake, you've spent 32 years treating me like I was subhuman. You've mocked my disability at every family gathering. You've taught younger cousins to do the same. You've made me feel worthless and broken my entire life. Tears were running down his face now. I didn't know it hurt you. You never said anything. I said plenty. You just never listened. And even if I hadn't, do you really think filming someone's neurological tics for social media entertainment is acceptable behavior? Rachel intervened, keeping us on legal ground. Mr. Martinez, TechFlow has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment based on disability status. Your actions violate multiple sections of our employee handbook. She read from the policy I'd written myself. Any employee who engages in harassment, discrimination, or hostile behavior toward colleagues based on disability, medical conditions, or protected characteristics will face immediate termination. I'll sue, Jake said suddenly, his desperation turning to anger. This is wrongful termination. You can't fire me for off-duty behavior. I pulled out his employment contract and flipped to page 4. Section 7.3, Employee. Acknowledges that social media activity reflecting negatively on TechFlow or creating hostile work environments may result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. He'd signed that contract 3 years ago, probably without reading it carefully. The clause had been specifically included to prevent exactly this situation. Jake, I said, my voice softening slightly. I hired you despite your mediocre qualifications because you're family. I've overlooked your poor performance reviews because you're family. I've given you opportunities and promotions you didn't earn because you're family. Then don't fire me because I'm family. I'm firing you because you're a liability. You've harassed your CEO, violated company policies, and exposed TechFlow to potential legal action. Any other employee would have been terminated immediately. The room fell silent except for Jake's ragged breathing. He was finally understanding that his family connection wouldn't save him this time. What am I supposed to tell people? He asked. Quietly. How do I explain getting fired by my own cousin? You tell them the truth, Jake. You tell them you harassed a disabled person, filmed it, posted it online, and got fired when your victim turned out to be your boss. Rachel slid the termination letter across the table. Mr. Martinez, your employment with TechFlow is terminated effective immediately. Your access to company systems has been revoked. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Jake stared at the letter like it might burst into flames. Emma, please, I'm begging you. I have rent, car payments, credit cards. I can't afford to be unemployed. You should have considered those expenses before you decided to humiliate me. For entertainment, but I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. Doesn't that count for anything? I stood up, preparing to leave. Jake, you've apologized to me hundreds of times over the years. You're always sorry after you hurt me, but you're never sorry enough to change your behavior. This time will be different, I swear. I paused at the door, looking back at my cousin. The golden child who'd tormented me since childhood. Now crying in a conference room because his victim had finally gained the power to fight back. You're right, Jake. This time will be different. This time, there are consequences. Security escorted him from the building 20 minutes later, carrying a cardboard box containing 3 years of accumulated desk items. I watched from my office window as he walked to his car, still looking shell-shocked by the sudden reversal of our power dynamic. His phone was confiscated as company property, along with the original video file that had started this entire sequence. The evidence of his cruelty would be preserved in our legal files, but he'd lost access to the weapon he'd used against me. Rachel knocked on my door an hour later. All 12 terminations are complete. No one tried to fight the process. They all seemed too shocked to argue. I nodded, feeling strangely empty. The moment I'd fantasized about for years was over. My cousins were gone. The power balance was permanently shifted. How do you feel? She asked. I considered the question, surprised by my own clarity. I can finally breathe. After Jake's termination, I moved through the building, observing the other confrontations happening simultaneously. Each conference room contained a similar scene. Shocked family members facing the consequences of their cruelty, while HR representatives maintained professional detachment. Conference room B housed Sophia's termination. Through the glass window, I could see her crying while clutching tissues, her usual confidence completely shattered. She'd always been the most emotionally volatile of my cousins, and the revelation was hitting her particularly hard. I posted the video she was saying to Rachel's assistant. But I didn't think. Emma's just ... Just what? I wondered. Just the family disappointment who couldn't possibly be successful. Just the weird cousin whose achievements didn't count. Just someone whose dignity was optional. Miguel Jr.'s termination in Conference Room C was proceeding more quietly. He sat slumped in his chair, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. Unlike Jake's desperate pleading or Sophia's emotional breakdown, Miguel seemed to be processing the magnitude of his error with stunned silence. Diego, in Conference Room D, was trying a different approach entirely. I could hear his raised voice through the door. This is discrimination. She can't fire family members. I'm calling a lawyer. His threats were empty, of course. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the legal framework was bulletproof. But his aggressive response didn't surprise me, Diego. It had always been the most confrontational of my cousins. The most heartbreaking scene was in Conference Room E, where my youngest cousin Maria sat crying silently. Spays at 23. She'd been following the lead of older cousins, laughing along with their cruelty without fully understanding its impact. Her termination felt necessary but painful. She was a victim of family dysfunction as much as a perpetrator. I found myself lingering outside Conference Room F, where my cousin Carmen Jr. was learning about her termination. She'd been one of the quieter participants in Thursday's harassment, mostly laughing at others' jokes rather than creating content herself. But laughter was participation, and participation had consequences. I barely did anything. She was protesting to the HR representative. I just laughed a little. That's not harassment. The HR rep, following the script we prepared, remained professional. Ms. Santos, creating a hostile environment includes encouraging harassment through positive reactions. Your laughter validated and amplified the harmful behavior. This was perhaps the most important lesson for all of them. That complicity was as damaging as active participation. Bystanders who enabled harassment shared responsibility for its impact. Back in my office, I reviewed the status reports as each termination concluded. The process was surprisingly efficient. Most of my cousins were too shocked to mount serious arguments, and the evidence was too overwhelming to dispute. But the emotional complexity was staggering. These weren't just employees being fired for policy violations, they were family members who'd shaped my entire childhood and adolescence. Each termination felt like closing a chapter of my life story. Marcus appeared in my doorway as the last conference room emptied. All done. 12 terminations completed. Security escorts completed. Company property recovered. Any significant resistance? Diego threatened legal action. Sofia asked if she could speak with you personally. Jake tried to negotiate some kind. A family exemption. But nothing that changes the outcome. I appreciated Marcus's clinical summary, but I could see the emotional toll in his face. He'd watched me endure family dysfunction for years, and witnessing its resolution was affecting him too. Want to talk about the Sophia request? He asked. I'd been dreading this conversation. Sophia and I had been closest among all the cousins during childhood, before family dynamics poisoned our relationship. Part of me wanted to hear what she had to say, but another part knew it would just be more manipulation. What did she say? That? She never meant to hurt you, that she didn't understand how serious Tourette's was. She wants to make amends and rebuild your relationship. The predictable script of abusers facing consequences: minimize the harm, claim ignorance, promise change, demand forgiveness. I'd heard variations of this performance hundreds of times over the years. Did you tell her that her understanding of Tourette's was irrelevant? That mocking anyone's neurological differences is inherently wrong. I stayed professional. But yes, the HR team made it clear that intent doesn't negate impact. I walked to my window, looking out at the TechFlow campus, where thousands of employees worked in the inclusive environment I'd fought to create. My cousin's terminations had sent a powerful message. Harassment would not be tolerated. Cute, regardless of personal relationships. Emma, Marcus said quietly, I know this was necessary. But are you okay? Emotionally, I mean. Was a fair question. I'd just ended 12 careers and permanently damaged family relationships that had defined my entire life. The psychological impact should have been devastating. Instead, I felt oddly peaceful. You know what's strange, Marcus? I feel guilty that I don't feel worse about this. Maybe that's because you finally did something healthy. Maybe guilt is what you've been trained to feel when you stand up for yourself. Dr. Kim had made similar observations during our sessions. My family had conditioned me to feel responsible for their emotions while ignoring my own needs. Protecting myself felt wrong because I'd been taught that my value came from absorbing their dysfunction. They're going to hate me, I said, watching cars move through the parking lot below. They already treated you terribly. What's the difference between hatred and their previous behavior? He was right. My cousins had already demonstrated their opinion of me through decades of cruelty. Their hatred couldn't be worse than their existing contempt. The family is going to implode over this, I continued. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas celebrations, family weddings, everything will be different now. Good, Marcus said firmly. Those events were torture for you anyway. Maybe now you can build relationships with family members who actually respect you. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Mia, people are saying you fired Jake and Sophia. Please tell me this isn't true. The family communication network was already spreading news of the terminations. By evening, every relative would know that twitchy Emma had revealed herself as a successful CEO who'd terminated her own cousins for harassment. I need to call my parents, I told Marcus. They're going to hear distorted versions of this story, and I want them to understand what really happened. Do you want support for that conversation? I considered his offer, but this was something I needed to handle alone. My parents had enabled my cousin's behavior through decades of inaction. They deserved to hear directly from me why their silence had consequences. Thanks, but I've got this. For the first time in my life, I actually feel like I've got this. As Marcus left my office, I sat down to compose the most difficult phone call of my life. My parents needed to understand that their daughter had finally stopped accepting unacceptable treatment. The termination letters were signed. The evidence was documented. The consequences were implemented. Now came the hardest part: rebuilding my life without the family dynamics that had shaped it for 32 years. My phone started ringing at 6 p.m. and didn't stop for 3 hours. The family communication network had exploded with news of the terminations. And everyone had opinions about my decision to fire 12 relatives simultaneously. The first call came from Aunt Carmen, Jake's mother. Her voice was shrill with hysteria. "Emma, how could you do this to your own family? Jake is devastated. He can't find another job with a termination on his record." I'd prepared for this conversation during the drive home from work. Aunt Carmen, Jake filmed himself mocking my disability and posted it online. That's harassment, and it violated our company policies. But your family forgives. You can't destroy his career over some silly video. There it was again. The minimization that had enabled decades of abuse. Documented harassment became a silly video. Systematic cruelty became family dynamics. My pain became irrelevant compared to their comfort. "Jake destroyed his own career when he chose to humiliate me publicly," I replied. "I just enforced the consequences." "You've changed, Emma. Success has made you cold and vindictive." Think Emma I knew would never hurt family like this. The Emma you knew accepted abuse silently while protecting everyone else from consequences. That Emma doesn't exist anymore. She hung up on me, but my phone immediately rang again. Uncle Miguel calling about his son's termination. Emma Miguel Jr. was just following along with the others. "Not a bad kid. Can't you give him another chance?" "Col Miguel, your son participated in filming harassment of his CEO. There are no second chances for that level of professional misconduct." "But he has student loans, a mortgage. You're going to ruin his life over a family misunderstanding." A family misunderstanding. 32 years of systematic dehumanization reduced to a simple misunderstanding that I was apparently too sensitive to overlook. His financial obligations should have motivated him to treat his boss with respect, I said calmly. Actions have consequences, even for family members. The calls continued in predictable patterns. Each relative called to defend their child, minimize the harassment, and demand that I reconsider the terminations. None expressed concern for how the harassment had affected me. None acknowledged that my cousin's behavior was genuinely wrong. Sophia's mother was particularly manipulative. "Emma Sophia is seeing a therapist now. She realizes she made a mistake. Surely you can find forgiveness in your heart." Aunt Rosa, Sophia didn't make a mistake. She made a choice. She chose to film my humiliation and post it for entertainment. Those are deliberate actions, not accidental errors. But she's family? Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore? It means she should have treated me better. Not that she should face fewer consequences. By 9 p.m., I'd received calls from 8 different relatives, each delivering variations of complaining. The same message. I was overreacting, destroying the family, and letting success corrupt my values. Not one person called to express sympathy for what I'd endured or support for my decision to protect myself. The most painful call came from my grandmother, Abuela Rosa. Her voice was weak and confused. "Mia, I don't understand what's happening. Everyone is crying and angry. They say you hurt the family. Abuela, some of the cousins were very mean to me at Thanksgiving. They made fun of my condition and filmed it. I had to fire them from my company because what they did was wrong. But Emma, family is family. We forgive each other. Why can't you forgive them?" The question broke my heart because I understood her confusion. In her generation, family loyalty trumped everything else. Women especially were expected to absorb abuse gracefully and maintain peace at any cost. "Abuela, I've been forgiving them for 32 years. But they never changed their behavior. Forgiveness without consequences isn't forgiveness, it's enabling." She didn't understand, but she didn't argue further. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling more isolated than ever. My entire extended family was mobilizing against me, painting me as the villain in a story where I'd been the victim. My parents called around 10 p.m. After apparently hearing from every other relative, my father's voice was tight with stress. "Emma, we need to talk about what happened today." "Which part, Dad? The harassment or the consequences?" "Both. Your mother and I are getting calls from everyone. They're saying you fired 12 family members out of revenge. I fired 12 employees for violating harassment policies. The fact that their family makes their behavior worse, not more excusable." My mother took the phone. "Mia, We saw the video. What they did was wrong. But firing them seems extreme. Couldn't you have just talked to them? This was the response I'd feared most. My own parents falling into the family pattern of minimizing abuse and prioritizing others' comfort over my well-being. Mom, I've been talking to them about their treatment of me for decades. But they don't listen. They don't change. They don't respect me as a human being. But Emma, you're successful now. You don't need to worry about what they think. Success doesn't make harassment acceptable. If anything, it makes it worse because they were mocking their own provider. My father's voice returned. Emma, I understand you're hurt, but think about the bigger picture. These terminations will divide the family permanently. Is that really what you want? Dad, the family has been divided my entire life. I was just on the wrong side of the division. Now I'm finally protecting myself. The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents alternating between supporting my decision and worrying about family consequences. They understood intellectually that the harassment was wrong, but emotionally, they couldn't accept the permanent damage to family relationships. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and reviewed the text messages that had accumulated throughout the evening. Most were from family members expressing disappointment, anger, or attempts at manipulation. You've gone too far this time, Emma. Success has changed you for the worse. Family should always come first. Jake is talking about suicide. Is that what you wanted? The last message stopped me cold. Jake's manipulation through threats of self-harm was a familiar pattern from childhood whenever he faced serious consequences. It'd escalate to emotional blackmail that forced adults to rescue him. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to our legal team. Jake was making threats, they needed to be documented. But I wouldn't allow his manipulation to change my decision. Marcus called at 11 p.m. to check on me. I saw the news reports about TechFlow's harassment terminations. How are you holding up? The family is in full crisis mode. Everyone's calling to tell me I'm destroying lives and relationships over a harmless video. Are you questioning your decision? I considered his question carefully. No. If anything, their reactions are confirming that I made the right choice. Not one person has apologized for the harassment or acknowledged that it was wrong. They're all focused on protecting the perpetrators. That's because you've disrupted their entire family system. You were supposed to absorb abuse silently while they faced no consequences. Now they're panicking because the power dynamic has shifted. Dr. Kim had explained similar concepts during our sessions. Dysfunctional families depend on scapegoats to maintain stability. When scapegoats refuse their assigned role, the entire system becomes chaotic. Marcus, I think I need to prepare for complete family estrangement. They're not going to forgive me for refusing to be their victim anymore. Would that be such a bad thing? You've been miserable at family events for decades. He was right. I've dreaded family gatherings for years, knowing they'd involve humiliation and emotional pain. The prospect of never attending another Rodriguez family dinner actually felt liberating. The hardest part, I admitted, is realizing that they never actually loved me. They loved having someone to diminish and control. When I stopped playing that role, their affection disappeared. Emma, people who love you don't mock your disability for entertainment. What you're losing isn't love, it's familiarity. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment processing the day's events. 12 careers ended, dozens of family relationships damaged, an entire social structure permanently altered. But for the first time in my life, I felt completely authentic. No more hiding my success. No more tolerating abuse. No more pretending that cruelty was love. The phone records sitting on my coffee table told the story. 3 hours of family members demanding that I prioritize their comfort over my dignity. Not one call expressing concern for my well-being or support for my decision to protect myself tomorrow would bring new challenges as word spread beyond the family. But tonight, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The peace that comes from finally refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. My family was imploding, but I was finally free. 2 days after the terminations, my parents appeared at my apartment unannounced. I found them sitting in the lobby at 7 a.m., looking exhausted and older than I remembered. They'd driven through the night from Los Angeles. Probably after another marathon session of family phone calls demanding they talk sense into their daughter. "Mom, Dad," I said, "surprised to see them. Should have called. I would have prepared." "We need to talk, Mia," my father interrupted, his voice carrying a weariness I'd never heard before. "Really talk? About what happened and what happens?" Next, I invited them up to my penthouse apartment, watching their faces as they took in the luxury that represented my success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, original artwork, furniture that cost more than their monthly mortgage, visual proof that their daughter had achieved something extraordinary. My mother moved quietly through the living room, touching surfaces as if confirming they were real. "Emma, this is beautiful. You've done so well for yourself." "Thank you, Mom." She picked up a framed photo from my side table, a picture of me and Marcus at the TechFlow IPO celebration, both of us grinning in front of the NASDAQ building. "I remember when you called to tell us about going public. We didn't really understand what it meant. It meant your daughter became worth $500 million in a single day," I said gently. "It meant the company I built was valued at $2.8 billion. My father sat heavily on my couch, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. "Emma, we came here because we need to understand. The whole family is falling apart. People are taking sides. Some say you were right to fire them. Others say you've gone too far. What do you say, Dad?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the San Francisco Bay. "I say we failed you. Your mother and I, we failed you for 32 years. The admission hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected more pressure to reconcile with my cousins, more attempts to minimize the harassment. I hadn't expected accountability. My mother joined us, tears streaming down her face. "Mia, we watched that video. We saw what they did to you. And we realized, we've been watching them do things like that your whole life. We told ourselves it was normal family teasing," my father continued. "We told ourselves you were strong enough to handle it. We told ourselves that speaking up would just make things worse. But we were wrong," my mother whispered. "We were protecting the wrong people. We should have been protecting you." I felt my own tears starting, emotions I'd been suppressing for days finally breaking through. Do you know what it was like sitting at that table while they filmed me? Knowing that every person I'd ever loved was either participating or staying silent. "No," my father said honestly, "we don't. But we're starting to understand." My mother pulled out her phone, scrolling to something she'd prepared. "Emma, we spent yesterday going through old photos and videos, looking at family events with new eyes." She showed me a video from my cousin Diego's quinceañera 3 years ago. In the background, barely audible, I could hear Jake making jokes about my tics, while others laughed. The camera had captured my face, hurt, embarrassed, trying to smile. "Through the humiliation, we found dozens of moments like this," she said. "Times when they were cruel and we did nothing. Times when you were hurt and we chose to keep the peace instead of protecting you. We've been having conversations with other family members," my father added. "Your tia Patricia, your cousin Carmen's mother-in-law, even some of the older relatives. They've been seeing this pattern too." This surprised me. I'd assumed the entire family was united against me, but apparently some members were questioning the narrative. "Tia Patricia said something that hit us hard," my mother continued. "She said Emma has been successful for years, and instead of celebrating her, we've been allowing people to tear her down." "What kind of family does that?" "The kind of family that was threatened by your success," my father said. "The kind that needed to keep you small to feel better about themselves." We talked for hours with my parents sharing observations they'd been making about family dynamics. They'd started recognizing patterns of favoritism, scapegoating, and enabling that had shaped my entire childhood. "The medical records," my mother said suddenly, pulling out a manila folder. "I brought your childhood medical records. All the doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, specialist consultations we went to when you were first diagnosed." She opened the folder, revealing documents I'd never seen. Reports from neurologists, psychologists, and educational specialists, all confirming what I'd known intuitively, that my Tourette's was a neurological condition requiring understanding and accommodation, not mockery and punishment. Dr. Martinez wrote in 1999, she read, that Emma's tics may worsen under stress or emotional distress, and that family support will be crucial for her psychological development. 25 years ago, a doctor told us that family stress would make your condition worse, my father said, his voice heavy with guilt. And we let them stress you for decades. We have documentation here of your exceptional intelligence, your academic achievements, your potential for success, my mother added. Every professional who worked with you saw your brilliance. But we let family members treat you like you were broken. The medical records represented validation. I'd never received proof that my differences were neurological, not character flaws, and that my achievements were legitimate despite my condition. Emma, my father said, we want you to know that we support your decision to fire them. It was the right thing to do. We also want to apologize, my mother added, for 32 years of failing to protect you, for prioritizing family peace over your well-being, for allowing people to abuse our daughter while we watched. I dreamed of hearing these words for decades, but now that they'd been spoken, I felt strangely empty. Their apology couldn't undo the damage, couldn't restore the confidence their inaction had cost me. Thank you, I said quietly. That means more than you know, but I need you to understand I can't go back to the way things were. I can't pretend that family relationships matter more than basic human respect. We don't want you to, my father said firmly. We want to build new relationships, healthier ones, starting with us. We're cutting contact with family members who refuse to acknowledge that the harassment was wrong. My mother added, we won't attend events where you're not welcome or respected. This was more than I'd dared hope for. My parents finally choosing me over family dysfunction. Are you prepared for the consequences? The family is going to pressure you to change your minds. Let them, my father said. We've spent 60 years trying to keep everyone happy. It's time to protect the people who matter most. My mother reached into her purse and pulled out another item, a small frame containing my third-grade report card, the one showing straight A's despite teachers' low expectations. I've carried this in my purse for 24 years, she said. Every time someone suggested you'd never amount to anything, I'd look at this and know they were wrong. I should have shown it to them. I should have defended you. You're defending me now, I said, accepting the frame. That's what matters. We spent the rest of the day planning how to rebuild our relationship outside the toxic family structure. They would stay in contact with relatives who respected me and distance themselves from those who didn't. Future holidays would be celebrated with people who valued inclusion over tradition. Emma, my mother said as they prepared to leave, we're proud of you, not just for your success, but for finally standing up for yourself. It took courage we should have given you decades ago. I watched them drive away that evening. I felt something I'd never experienced, unconditional support from my parents. They'd chosen to see the truth about our family dynamics and align themselves with justice rather than comfort. The childhood medical records they'd left sat on my coffee table. 30 years of documentation proving that I'd always been worthy of respect and accommodation. My parents had kept this evidence of my value even when they'd failed to defend it. Now, finally, they were ready to be the advocates I'd always needed them to be. 3 weeks after the terminations, Jake's lawsuit arrived via certified mail. I'd been expecting it. Marcus had warned me that desperate former employees often file wrongful termination claims, hoping to pressure companies into settlements rather than face costly litigation. The complaint was exactly what our legal team had predicted: claims of discrimination, retaliation, and violation of labor rights. Jake's attorney had crafted a narrative painting him as the victim of a vindictive CEO who'd abused her power to settle personal grievances. Rodriguez terminated Martinez for engaging in private family activities unrelated to his employment, the lawsuit claimed. This action constitutes wrongful termination and discrimination based on family relationships. I read the document in Jennifer Walsh's office, surrounded by the evidence files we'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Our legal strategy had been developed before the terminations were announced. We'd known that consequences would trigger desperate legal challenges. This is actually a gift, Jennifer said, spreading our counter evidence across the conference table. By filing suit, Jake has opened himself up to discovery. We can now subpoena additional evidence and testimony that will devastate his case. Centerpiece of our defense was Jake's own video, enhanced by our IT forensics team to capture every cruel detail. Audio analysis had isolated his specific comments about my employability and disability. Metadata proved the video's authenticity and Jake's role in creating it. Section 1. Harassment based on disability status. Jennifer read from our response. Brief. Martinez filmed himself mocking his CEO's neurological condition, using derogatory terms like twitchy Emma while suggesting that people with Tourette syndrome are unemployable. Section 2. Social media harassment creating hostile work environment. Martinez posted this content publicly, where it was viewed by numerous TechFlow employees and members of the general public. Section 3. Violation of social media policies. Explicitly outlined in employee handbook and signed acknowledgement forms. Rachel Morrison had compiled every document Jake had signed during his employment contracts, policy acknowledgments, and training certifications that established his awareness of company harassment policies. The beauty of our case, Rachel explained, is that Jake documented his own policy violations. No jury will sympathize with someone who filmed himself harassing a disabled person. Sophia had joined Jake's lawsuit as a co-plaintiff, along with Miguel Jr. and 2 other terminated cousins. Their attorney was attempting to frame the mass terminations as evidence of discriminatory intent rather than appropriate consequences for documented harassment. 5 co-plaintiffs actually strengthens our case, Jennifer noted. It demonstrates that this wasn't personal retaliation against Jake specifically, but consistent enforcement of policies violated by multiple employees. The discovery phase began in January, with depositions scheduled for all parties involved. I would testify about the harassment's impact on my workplace and personal life. Marcus would explain TechFlow's anti-harassment policies and their consistent enforcement. Multiple employees would describe seeing the viral video and its effect on company morale, but the most damaging testimony would come from family members who'd witnessed the Thanksgiving incident. Aunt Patricia had volunteered to testify about what she'd observed, describing the systematic harassment as cruel and calculated. Emma sat there while they mocked her condition for entertainment. Patricia's deposition statement read, Jake was performing for the camera, making exaggerated gestures and sounds that bore no resemblance to Emma's actual tics. It was clearly intended to humiliate her. Even some of my cousins were distancing themselves from Jake's lawsuit. Carmen Jr. had declined to join as a plaintiff, apparently recognizing that fighting the termination would only draw more attention. To her participation in harassment, the legal strategy was straightforward. Demonstrate that the terminations were justified responses to documented policy violations, not discriminatory actions based on family relationships. Jake's own evidence, the harassment video, would prove that his termination was appropriate and necessary. Wrongful termination requires proving that the firing was illegal or violated public policy. Jennifer explained during our preparation session. Terminating employees for harassing colleagues actually serves public policy by creating safer workplaces. The lawsuit had generated media attention, with business publications covering the case as an example of social media harassment consequences. Most coverage was favorable to TechFlow's position, praising our enforcement of anti-harassment policies regardless of personal relationships. CEO fires family members for disability harassment, read the headline in Forbes. TechFlow's response shows corporate responsibility in action. The publicity was reinforcing our message that harassment wouldn't be tolerated, even when perpetrators were related to company leadership. Other tech companies were reaching out to learn about our policies and implementation strategies. By March, Jake's legal position had deteriorated significantly. His attorney had struggled to find expert witnesses willing to defend the harassment video as harmless family interaction. Employment law specialists consulted for the case uniformly agreed that the terminations were legally justified. Discovery had also revealed additional damaging evidence. Jake's phone records showed that he'd shared the harassment video with multiple people beyond his initial social media post. Text messages indicated that he'd specifically targeted my disability for mockery, using terms like retarded and freak in private conversations about me. These text messages destroy any claim that the harassment was unintentional or mild, Jennifer observed. They show deliberate cruelty and dehumanizing language that goes far beyond the public video. The final blow came when Jake's attorney attempted to argue that family relationships exempted the harassment from workplace policies. This strategy backfired spectacularly when our expert witness, a disability rights attorney, testified about the increased harm caused by harassment. From trusted relationships, when colleagues harass each other, victims can seek support from family members. Dr. Lisa Chen explained to the court. When family members are the harassers, victims lose both workplace safety and personal support systems. The harm is exponentially greater. In April, 6 months after filing his lawsuit, Jake's attorney approached us about settlement discussions. The case was clearly unwinnable, and continuing litigation would only generate more negative publicity for the plaintiffs. They're offering to drop all claims in exchange for neutral references and agreement not to contest unemployment benefits. Jennifer reported, "No admission of wrongdoing, no financial settlement. I considered the offer but ultimately rejected. I want a complete legal victory. I want the court to officially rule that these terminations were justified. I want precedent that protects other employers who enforce anti-harassment policies." The trial lasted 3 days. Jake and his co-plaintiffs testified about their shock at learning my identity and their claims that the harassment was misunderstood family interaction. Their attorney attempted to portray me as vindictive and power-hungry, using my success against me, but our evidence was overwhelming. The harassment video spoke for itself, requiring no interpretation or context. Employment law experts confirmed that the terminations followed proper procedures and legal standards. Family witnesses described the harassment as deliberate and cruel. The judge's ruling was decisive and comprehensive. The terminations were not only legally justified but professionally necessary. The defendant's conduct constituted clear harassment based on disability status, created hostile work environment conditions, and violated explicitly stated company policies. Furthermore, the court continued, the fact that harassment victims and perpetrators were related does not diminish the severity of the misconduct or the appropriateness of employment consequences. If anything, harassment by family members demonstrates a deeper level of cruelty that justifies immediate termination. The court dismissal was comprehensive and final. Jake and his co-plaintiffs were ordered to pay TechFlow's legal costs, totaling over $200,000. The ruling established legal precedent supporting employers who enforce anti-harassment policies consistently, regardless of personal relationships. More importantly, the legal victory validated my decision to hold my cousins accountable. A federal judge had reviewed all the evidence and concluded that their behavior was not only morally wrong but legally actionable. The court documents now sit in my office safe, alongside my MIT diploma and CEO appointment letter, official recognition that standing up to harassment was not only justified but necessary. Justice, it turned out, looked exactly like a legal ruling confirming that disabled people deserve respect, that family relationships don't excuse abuse, and that consequences for harassment are appropriate regardless of who administers them. 6 months after the terminations, I stood at the podium of TechFlow's annual charity gala, looking out at a ballroom filled with employees, investors, and tech industry leaders. The event was celebrating our $50 million donation to neurodiversity research and disability advocacy organizations, a cause that had become deeply personal following my public stand against harassment. Tonight, we celebrate not just our company's success, but our commitment to creating workplaces where everyone can thrive. I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone, where neurological differences are seen as strengths, not weaknesses, where disability is met with accommodation, not discrimination. The audience of 800 people applauded enthusiastically. In the front row, I could see my parents beaming with pride, finally witnessing the recognition their daughter deserved. Marcus sat beside them, the brother I'd chosen over the family I'd been born into. The past 6 months had brought profound changes to every aspect of my life. TechFlow's stock price had surged following positive coverage of our anti-harassment policies, and commitment to inclusive leadership. Other CEOs were reaching out to learn how we'd built such a supportive corporate culture. But the personal transformations were even more significant. The family relationships that had defined my first 32 years had been completely restructured. Some connections had strengthened, while others had been permanently severed. My parents had kept their promise to prioritize my well-being over family dysfunction. They'd stopped attending events where I wasn't welcome and refused to enable relatives who continued defending the harassment. Their support had given me something I'd never experienced: unconditional love from the people who mattered most. Emma's boundaries are our boundaries now. My father had told relatives who pressured them to reconcile the family. If you can't respect our daughter, you don't get access to us either. 3 cousins had reached out with genuine apologies and requests to rebuild our relationships. Carmen Jr. had written a heartfelt letter acknowledging her complicity in years of harassment and asking for the opportunity to earn forgiveness. Patricia's daughter Maria had started therapy to understand how family dysfunction had shaped her behavior. These overtures were cautiously encouraging, but I was taking rebuilding relationships slowly. Trust once broken so completely required time and consistent behavior to restore. Other family members had doubled down on their victim narrative. Jake had started a blog called Cancelled by Family, where he portrayed himself as the victim of corporate overreach and disability activism. Gone too far. His attempts to monetize his victimhood had attracted a small following of people who believed harassment consequences were unfair. Sophia had moved back in with her parents after struggling to find new employment. Her termination for harassment had followed her through multiple interview processes, with employers expressing concerns about her judgment and character. The consequences of her actions were ongoing and severe. The legal victory had been decisive. Jake's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, the court ruling that the terminations were not only justified but necessary. The precedent was being cited in other harassment cases nationwide, strengthening protections for disabled employees. But perhaps the most meaningful change was internal. For the first time in my life, I felt completely authentic in all my relationships. No more hiding my success to protect others' feelings. No more tolerating abuse to maintain false peace. No more pretending that cruelty was love. Dr. Kim had helped me understand the magnitude of this transformation during our sessions. You've moved from surviving your family to choosing your family, she explained. You're no longer defined by relationships that diminish you. The therapy journal I'd been keeping for 3 years told the story of this evolution. Early entries documented pain, confusion, and self-doubt. Recent entries reflected confidence, clarity, and hope. May 15th had dinner with Mom and Dad tonight. They asked about my work with genuine interest and celebrated my achievements without minimizing them. This is what family support should feel like. June 3rd, Marcus and I launched the Neurodiversity Initiative at 3 more companies. My experiences helping other disabled employees advocate for themselves. Purpose emerging from pain. June 20th. Realized today that I haven't had a major tick episode in weeks. Removing toxic stress from my life has actually improved my neurological symptoms. Dr. Martinez was right. Family support affects everything. Standing at the charity gala podium, I concluded my speech with words I'd never thought I'd be able to say. 6 months ago, I learned that some family relationships are too toxic to preserve. Tonight, I want to thank the family I've chosen, colleagues who became friends who became advocates, and parents who finally learned to protect their daughter. To everyone fighting for dignity in hostile environments, you deserve respect regardless of your differences. You deserve support regardless of your challenges. And you deserve consequences for those who refuse to provide both. Oh my God. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Later at the reception, dozens of people approached to share their own stories of family dysfunction, workplace harassment, and the courage required to choose authenticity over approval. A young man with autism thanked me for showing that successful disabled people could demand respect. A woman with ADHD said my story had inspired her to report harassment at her company. Parents of neurodivergent children expressed gratitude for the representation and advocacy. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the hotel balcony with Marcus and my parents looking out at the San Francisco skyline that had become my home. The city lights reflected off the bay, creating a backdrop for reflection on how far we'd all traveled. "Emma," my mother said quietly, "I know we can't undo 32 years of failing you, but watching you tonight, seeing how you've turned your pain into purpose, I've never been more proud to be your mother. We raised a daughter who changed an entire industry's approach to harassment." My father added, "That's a legacy worth celebrating." Marcus raised his champagne glass. "To Emma Rodriguez, the woman who proved that standing up to bullies is always worth it, even when the bullies are family." As we toasted, I thought about the new family photo sitting on my desk at home, instead of the old image showing me isolated. At the edge of a group, this picture captured me surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated my existence. My parents, Marcus, the TechFlow leadership team, and several disability advocates who'd become close friends. The contrast was striking. In the old photo, I'd been trying to disappear, to take up less space, to avoid drawing attention to my differences. In the new photo, I was centered, confident, and completely authentic, ticks and all. The termination letters that had ended 12 careers 6 months ago represented more than professional consequences. They'd been declarations of independence from relationships that required me to diminish myself for others' comfort tonight. Celebrating with people who valued my contributions and respected my humanity. I finally understood what healthy family dynamics could look like. Love that didn't require perfection. Support that didn't come with conditions. Acceptance that celebrated differences rather than demanding conformity. My cousins had taught me what I wouldn't tolerate. My chosen family was teaching me what I tore. Like chosen family was teaching me what I deserved. The golden childhood mocked, twitchy Emma was now unemployed and bitter, facing the long-term consequences of his cruelty. Meanwhile, the weird cousin he'd dismissed had built something extraordinary, not just a successful company, but a life filled with authentic relationships and meaningful purpose. Standing on that balcony, surrounded by people who saw my worth, I felt something I'd never experienced in 32 years of Rodriguez family gatherings. I felt like I belonged exactly where I was, exactly as I was. The journey from victim to victor was complete. The rest was just living freely in the life I'd finally claimed for myself.